On this episode of Project 380, I'm going to be installing the rear calipers and upgrading the rear discs and pads. As you can see, the rear of the car has been jacked up and put on axle stands. The wheel has been removed, and since I've put on the Destroyer Die suspension setup, I haven't replaced the rear brakes. To start things off today, we're first going to look at the brake line. I've already installed the hard line that goes across the subframe from right to left, but I haven't made a hard pipe that goes from the front to the rear that joins into the T-block. And that's for a very good reason. Destroyer Die make their own brake line kit. So this one is a stainless steel braided line that goes from the master cylinder all the way to the T-block at the back. So with this, we're not going to worry about corrosion anymore. And if you do bottom the car out, it's not going to be a huge issue, as these won't dent anywhere near as easily as a hard pipe. It comes in a nice black coated finish, and it comes with the banjo bolt to attach it to the master cylinder. And I'm going to be using that in conjunction with the rear braided hose kit, which also comes with a nice new T-block. In this kit, the right hand rear brake pipe is actually crimped into the T-block. Compared to the old rubber FLEXY lines, these nice new stainless steel braided lines will give the brake a better feel. The old rubber ones tend to swell up when you're braking excessively and cause the pedal to slightly creep. With the stainless steel braided ones, you won't get any expansion in the pipe, and you don't have to worry about these getting old, brittle and perished. I'm going to first put the T-block onto the subframe, and I'm going to put a little bit of copper slip on these studs first, as these can corrode pretty quickly and I've snapped a fair few in the past. These don't need to be done up too tight, as they're only a small nut. Then the red protective cover could be pulled out, and then the right to left rear brake pipe could be screwed into the T-block. I'll fit the pipe with the T-block on it first, so when I install the front to rear line, I've got a good place to work from. Front to rear line has two different ends on it. One is a banjo bolt fitting and the other is a swivel fitting. The swivel fitting is the one that goes into the rear T-block. So I'm going to screw the swivel end into the T-block and then pull the line from the rear to the front. I can now remove the red plastic cover from the swivel end, but I'm going to keep the yellow covers on the banjo end so no debris gets in it as I'm pulling it through to the front of the car, and remove the red plastic cover from the T-block. With the pipe pulled through the car, I can now remove the yellow plastic protective covers, and with the banjo bolts applied, I can now attach the front to rear braided brake line to the nice new Nomyn bias valve. While you're feeding the front to rear brake line through the car, make sure it's not kinked or spiraled at all. Make sure that pipe is nice and straight. Once it's connected both ends, you can then secure it up into the chassis rail. With the brake hoses all fitted, it's now onto the rear brake setup. And to start with is the rear brake discs. For now, I am sticking with the standard size discs. If I feel in the future, I will upgrade them. But for now, I have chosen some EBC black dimpled and grooved rear brake discs. Hopefully the dimples and grooves will dissipate the heat better and give me a nice even pad wear. These also help to clean the brake pads of any excess brake dust. These are handed, the left and the right, the dimples and the grooves spiral the opposite direction. They are labelled on the box which one goes on which side. As you may have seen in a previous episode, I have gone for the full Destroyer Die rear suspension setup, and this includes the rear hub. On the rear hub, it has the mountings for the original brake caliper and a second set of mountings for a hydraulic handbrake setup, so you can run a second caliper. Before installing the disc, make sure the hub surface is nice and clean, and this is optional, but I like to put a little bit of grease on the hub. This is going to ensure that the brake disc doesn't seize to the hub. I like to install it on this surface of the hub rather than the flat mating surface, as this is where it's more likely to seize on. These discs are black painted, so they don't come with the usual oil coating that normal brake discs do, but common practice, I like to clean them anyway. So I'm just going to grab a bit of brake cleaner and a rag and give them a good wipe down, and then install them onto the hub. With the rears, there are no retaining screws securing the disc to the hub. Not only am I sticking with the standard size brakes, I'm actually going to stick with the original brake calipers. These are just reconditioned ones that I've painted in VHT purple. Even though I'm using the destroy or die rear hubs, these fit exactly the same as they would on the normal ones. To start the installation of the brake calipers, I need to install the brake carriers. These need to be installed after the brake disc as they go over the brake disc. With these on first, the brake disc can't fit on. In the brake carriers, you do have some brake shims. I would advise you first where the brake shims fit into the carrier to clean them up as best as you can before installing the carrier on the car. If you've got rust and debris on the carrier, the shims are quite hard to fit. I've removed all the paint from these areas first, so now I can install them onto the hub. The two rear bolts that connect the carrier to the hub, I'm going to put a small bit of blue Loctite on. And then these need torquing up to 50 Newton meters. These next two steps, as in fitting the caliper or fitting the brake pads, can be done either way round, and it's complete personal preference. But I like to install the caliper first, as in my opinion it makes fitting the brake pads slightly easier. When you're fitting the brake pads, they can slip around a bit, and if you've got the brake caliper already installed, all you need to do is swing it down on top of the brake pads. So I'm going to semi-install the brake caliper first. Make sure the top slider pin is nice and clean and free of corrosion, and then apply a nice healthy amount of slider grease. What I like to do is install the caliper on the top slider and just put it up above the carrier, out of the way. With the caliper in this position, you can easily install the shims and the pads. Once they're in, you can swing the caliper down. For the brake pads, I've gone for a set of EBC green stuff, and this is for a couple of reasons. They produce less brake dust than the standard brake pads, they won't clog up with as much brake dust as the standard pads, and hopefully my wheels stay a little bit cleaner. They're not as noisy as some high performance pads. They are a lot more grippier than the standard pads, and they come with a brake-in surface. So once the red surface has disappeared, you know you can use the most out of the brakes and use them to their full potential. Installing these are exactly the same as the standard pads. The only difference is they don't have the little holes in the back of the pads where the springs go. You'll notice in the box, two of them have a little metal tab, and that is an audible wear sensor. So when your pads get too low, this will ping on the brake disc, making a horrible noise, and you know it's time to change your brake pads. These need to be installed on the inside, as in the back of the disc. To install the pads, I'm first going to put the shims into the carriers, and I'm going to put a bit of high temperature brake grease onto the shims. And then on the pads, I'm going to put a little bit of brake grease in between these two slots, and a little bit where the caliper is going to meet it. These could be a little bit tricky to install with new pads and new shims. With the pads installed, you can then swing the caliper down. Just be careful of this rubber bit as you're closing it up. Now for the bottom slider bolt. Before putting this in, make sure it's nice and clean and the threads are all good, and make sure the hex isn't too rounded. As you can see, I've bought a nice brand new set. I purchased these from Boffy Racing. Apply a nice bit of slider grease and put it in the bottom of the caliper. Once that's nice and tight, pop on the plastic cover to stop that pin corroding. With the pads and the calipers all installed and tightened up, it's time to connect the braided brake lines. The kit from Destroy or Die does include the banjo bolts. The right rear brake pipe is already installed as it's part of this T-block. So I'm going to remove the yellow plastic covers Make sure the mating surface of the caliper is nice, clean and free of debris. Grab the new banjo bolt, make sure there's a new copper washer on it, and install the other copper washer the other side of the banjo bolt, and then screw it into the caliper. Don't do this up too tight as it is only a banjo bolt. The left hand side of the car is fairly similar, the only difference is the brake line. On this end it's got a sort of hex to the brake line rather than a T, and this has actually got a rounded side, so it should only go into the subframe one way. Then secure it with a retaining clip, and then insert and tighten the brake pipe from the back. Once the FLEXY hose is installed, it's now time for the handbrake cable, or e-brake, parking brake, service brake, whichever you like to call it. And to start that off, we're actually going to go inside the car. Sorry about the mess, it's been a while. But inside the car, we want to make sure the handbrake is all the way down, and then find the adjuster, which will be underneath a couple of bits of plastic. We want to adjust this with a nice big flat-headed screwdriver. Adjust it enough so the cable is loose, but the adjuster doesn't come all the way off. Once the brakes are all bled, we can then come back and adjust this. Now for the e-brake cable, I've removed the brake pipe just so it's easier to see. First want to wind this nut on the cable itself all the way out. Slot this end into the lever, and then this end into the caliper. Wind this nut tight up to the caliper, and then using two 14mm, just tighten that up. So that is the discs, pads and new calipers all installed, with some destroyer die brake lines and some new handbrake cables. All that's left to do is bleed the brakes and set up the handbrake, which I'll be doing all in a future video. If this video did help you install your rear brakes or your destroyer die brake lines, make sure you leave it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you in the next one.